Welcome to our webinar on sustainable fuels. Biofuels, while it has been in existence for fairly long, was one of the most talked about topics in this year's G20 summit, which was held last month in Delhi. With the inauguration of the Global Biofuel Alliance, biofuels have gained or regained an importance in the developing world. And we thought that this is probably the best time to delve deeper into understanding biofuels and the regulatory framework in India and abroad as well. Biofuels is an appealing alternate energy option because one, they are renewable, have the potential to lower carbon emissions and environmental impact. And lastly, also help in reduction of import dependence that for India specifically. India, if you look at the import of oil, India currently imports around 80% of its oil. Almost 18% of oil use in India is by the transportation sector. In order to achieve the targets that India has set to reach net zero emissions by 2070, the transportation sector will have to undergo a major transition. In the last few years, there has been a dip in the ICE vehicle segment, and that was largely driven by COVID for one reason. The second, of course, introduction of electric vehicles. Maybe a small portion of the dip is because of electrification of vehicles. Despite all of that, the demand for fossil fuels in India continues to rise 3 to 4% per year. Therefore, sustainable biofuels like ethanol and biodiesel, along with electric vehicles, more efficient engines, other cleaner fuels like green hydrogen, etc., will play a very important role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The term biofuel refers to a class of renewable energy source made from biomass or organic material, typically or biological, that can be processed to create fuel for various uses. The most common biomass feedstocks for producing biofuels are corn, sugarcane, and animal waste like cow dung. If we look at the definition under the National Biofuels Policy of 2018, biofuels is defined as fuels produced from renewable resources and used in place of or in blend with diesel, petrol, or other fossil fuels for transport, stationary, portable, and other applications. From a regulatory standpoint, the central government had implemented the EBP program, which is the Ethanol Blended Program, way back in 2003, which provided for blending of ethanol with petrol and introduced a blend of 5% ethanol with 95% petrol. At the moment, ethanol makes up a little less than 12% of the petrol mix. This percentage is expected to rise with the 2022 amendment to the biofuel policy. It establishes an illustrative goal of achieving 20% ethanol blend in petrol by 2025 under the EBP program. In addition, the government is also setting a blending target for biodiesel at 5% by 2030. Beyond blending targets, India has also established guaranteed pricing, long-term ethanol contracts, technical standards and codes, financial support for building new facilities and upgrading existing ones. India has surely joined the ranks of major biofuel producers and consumers, thanks to a set of coordinated policies and high political support. However, the campaign in India to use biofuels is not without obstacles, and we will discuss all of these in much more detail as we go along in the webinar. Let's also take a look at some of the recent news and developments you might have heard of in the biofuel sector. First, of course, which I mentioned earlier, which is the GBA, or the Global Biofuel Alliance, which was launched on 9 September 2023 on the sidelines of the G20 summit. It aims to One, accelerate adoption of biofuels on a worldwide scale by promoting technological developments, boosting the use of sustainable fuels, and establishing strong standards and certification systems across a wide range of stakeholders, to serve as a hub for experts and central knowledge repository, encourage international cooperation when it comes to the technology itself, and the usual achieving environmental benefits, energy security, and to gain a diversified energy portfolio. Although GP has a lot of potential, there are limitations, for example, import restrictions on biofuels or environmental issues like water usage and land allocation. All of this needs to be resolved through dialogue among the members for an effective functioning of the alliance. Leading international organizations as well, including the likes of the World Bank, ADB, World Economic Forum, International Energy Agency, and international civil aviation organizations have also kind of pledged their support to the alliance. The other interesting piece of news and development is the noise around flex fuel vehicles. You must have read about the launch of the Toyota manufactured BS6 Stage 2 electric flex fuel vehicle by our Union Minister, Mr. Nitin Gadkari. Essentially, cars that are flex fuel compatible can run on multiple fuels or a blend of petrol and ethanol or methanol. Through changes like a petrol composition sensor, the engine of the flex fuel vehicle automatically adapts to any fuel ratio. The future of flex fuel vehicles does hold great promise, and the automotive industry should see flex fuel vehicles as one of the many alternatives to a greener auto industry. But this has to be obviously supported by the right government policies and the right combination of innovation and investment. Statistically, if we look at biofuel demand and use in the world today, almost a staggering 85% of the global biofuel demand is by the dominant market players, which is US, Brazil, and Europe. However, projections in the years to come show that the growth in this sector is going to be driven primarily by emerging economies, the likes of India, Brazil, Indonesia. This change in the global demand trends for developing countries can be attributed, of course, to policies, as I mentioned earlier, effectively for energy security considerations, additional production capacity, and due to the geographies that they have much lower or relatively lower production costs in these geographies. Before we start the webinar, let me give you a quick introduction to the firm and the panelists. My name is Praveen Raju. I'm one of the founding partners of Spice Route Legal. I lead the corporate M&A and private equity practice and also head the energy, sustainability, and mobility sector practice for the firm. We're a full-service law firm with a very strong focus on alternative energy, sustainability, and mobility. We work with some of the largest and most innovative players in the sector and provide services across the spectrum, right from project implementation, large renewable energy projects, to manufacturing capacities, commercial contracting, tendering, and bid support, financing, M&A, and funding requirements for our clients. So that's our overview. I'll also let my co-panelists, Janvi and Nikunj, quickly introduce themselves as well before we get on to the webinar.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for taking out the time to attend this webinar on biofuels. I am Janvi, a clean energy lawyer and a senior associate at Spice Route Legal's Alternative Energy, Sustainability, and Mobility practice. I work with a number of renewable energy players and technology providers who are contributing towards climate action goals. And it is truly fascinating to be a part of these projects. We're very thrilled to talk all about our analysis on biofuels and what it holds for India in the years to come. Nikunj, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Nikunj Baheti, an associate with Spice Route Legal and a part of the Energy, Sustainability, and Mobility team. Looking forward to a fruitful discussion on biofuels and leaving a long-lasting impression.
Thanks, Nikunj. So just diving into the contents of the webinar, Praveen's given us a very helpful context. Thanks for that, Praveen. So before we explore all that we have in store for the rest of the webinar, quickly summarizing the topics we will discuss. We'll take a closer look at the types of biofuels, policy framework, the ethanol blending program, incentives, licensing, and the approval regime for biofuel producers and suppliers. Nikunj will also take us through the most lucrative state-level incentives, engage in a comparative overview of regulatory landscape across jurisdictions like EU, USA, and Brazil, and what, if any, are some of the gaps in the existing policies and our recommendations on the way forward. If you have any questions during the course of this discussion, please post them in the Q&A box here, and we will take it up at the end. Let's start with the categorization of biofuel, right? So the National Biofuel Policy 2018, and we'll come to what that stands for and what it contains, is principally the most important piece of legislation for biofuels in the country. And in this policy, the scope of biofuels is broadened by shifting from the conventional biofuels, the way we know it, which is ethanol and biodiesel, to introduce different other types of biofuels, which can also be used as alternative and, in fact, more greener and sustainable fuels. So the categorization is ethanol, bioethanol, which is derived by biomass such as sugar or starch containing materials, and other cellulosic materials such as wood waste, agricultural or forestry residues, industrial waste. The second is biodiesel, which is methyl or ethyl ester of fatty acid produced from non-edible vegetable oils, acid oil, used cooking oil, or animal fat. We also have a categorization for advanced biofuels, which refers to fuels which are produced from lignocellulosic feedstock, that is agricultural and forestry residues, non-food energy crops, or fuels that have low carbon dioxide emission or high greenhouse gas reduction, or fuels that do not compete with food crops for land use, right? Then an interesting categorization that was introduced was also drop-in fuels, which is nothing but the liquid fuel produced from biomass or agri residues, such as municipal solid waste, plastic waste, which actually meet the Indian standards for motor spirit or high-speed diesel, and could be used in pure or blended form in vehicles without any modifications as such to the engine system or the current petroleum distribution system. So you're able to easily just drop into the diesel system or the vehicles for making the fuel more sustainable and blended. The last one is bio-CNG, which is purified form of biogas, whose composition and energy potential is similar to that of fossil-based natural gas, and is again produced from agricultural residues, animal dung, food waste, municipal solid waste, sewage water, etc. Now, like I mentioned, out of these categories, which came about mostly in the National Biofuel Policy, which was recognized, there are two types of biofuels which are very popular due to their industrial use. The sugar-based ethanol and biodiesel. We will spend some significant time discussing these two types of biofuels. So let's start with ethanol. This is blended with petrol to produce a greener and more sustainable fuel. It's actually not just that, it also offers higher fuel embedded oxygen and higher flame speed, which helps in complete combustion and reduce vehicular carbon emissions such as hydrocarbon and carbon monoxide. So it's green, yes, it's also more efficient. Recently, the source of feedstock for ethanol production has gained larger interest by technology providers and government alike. So let's take a closer look at what is 1G and 2G. I just mentioned 2G technology. So 1G ethanol technology uses starch as a source, which can be found in various feedstocks, such as wheat, corn, sugarcane, etc. 2G ethanol technology, on the other hand, uses cellulose and hemicelluloses as a source and uses crop residues, industrial waste that otherwise would be of no value. So for context, one of the forms of advanced biofuels mentioned earlier, which uses lignocellulosic feedstock for production of ethanol, is 2G ethanol, basically. Now, in terms of statistics, right, in terms of market share, more than 70% of ethanol today is sourced from the 1G technology feedstock. This is undoubtedly very heavy reliance, and this will bring in new challenges around production, sustainability, and just availability of ethanol. And the fact that 1G technologies have limited yield makes 2G technology more sustainable. And that's why we believe that this needs increasing focus. It has garnered enough focus from the government. We'll come to that in the next few slides. Now, while I've briefly discussed 1G, 2G, interestingly, in a recent development to explore more feedstocks, another generation of technology has been developed to produce biofuels, including ethanol, called the third generation, 3G biofuel technology, which uses microalgae as a feedstock. Presently, the production of this fuel is at a nascent stage and, of course, needs more examination with respect to commercial viability. The 2018 National Biofuel Policy aims to promote the algae-based biofuel, and required R&D on the subject to attain techno-commercial viability is ongoing. Now, in our analysis, we were going through all of these materials for biofuels and how it has developed in the market and in the economy over years. One of the key factors for shaping the future of ethanol industry is the pricing of the feedstock, which is the raw material that goes into the generation and production of ethanol. Now, the price of sugar and sugar-based products is controlled by the government under the Sugar Control Order. So the price of ethanol from these sugar-based feedstock is therefore higher. In fact, in 2021, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs approved the increase in price of ethanol from B and C heavy molasses, sugarcane juice, and sugar. On the other hand, the price of ethanol that is produced from food grains and industrial waste, everything is, all of those are lower than 1G technology, because that is decided by OMCs, the oil marketing companies. Government in this order has also gone ahead and decided that oil public sector entities should in fact be given the freedom to decide pricing for 2G ethanol, since this will also result in setting up and ramping up the setting up of advanced biofuel refineries in the country. In the topic of ethanol, it's also important to quickly discuss the Niti Aayog report titled Roadmap for Ethanol Blending in India 2020-25, which was released in June 2021. Some of the key observations and recommendations of the committee, I'll take you guys through those, also add in what we think should be done, or what some of our recommendations are in our analysis for the roadmap of ethanol blending, right? So the first one is that immediate notification of E20 blending plans should be made, so that the suitable actions by OEMs of vehicles can be taken. So like Praveen mentioned, E20 is quickly the nearest target that we have. And so to accommodate that and to support that level of blend, the vehicle manufacturers will need to take correct actions so that the engines support this blend. Private oil marketing companies should also be included in the EBP program to ensure participation of all stakeholders. That will just widen the horizon of everyone who's involved in the blending efforts. Between E10 and E20, which, like I said, is the next target, there are intermediate blends like E12 and E15. By the way, when we say E10, E20, it's ethanol 10, which is the percentage of blend that can be used with petrol. So other intermediate blends such as E12 and E15 should be given a push as well, because this will allow the OMCs some flexibility to manage procurement in accordance with supply and demand of ethanol. So E20, while a very commend-worthy target, it will go a long way in changing the oil industry as we know it. But I think it's helpful to explore other intermediate blends because OMCs will then be able to manage their demand and supply. With this, oil marketing companies, I believe, are in the center of this revolution, right? So there is a need for building the right infrastructure for OMCs to match the increased supplies and market the E20 and E20 blends across the country demand. The accelerated timelines for E20 blending target will inevitably lead for the OMCs to increase their tankage capacities, dispensing stations, and petroleum. As a result of also concentrating the ethanol distilleries in some part of the country in few states, OMCs will have to come up with a mechanism to compensate the suppliers for additional costs that are incurred for transporting ethanol, across the country. The next recommendation, which I believe, at least, in the industry and in the renewable energy industry that we've seen so far, is common across all sector, is the expediting regulatory clearances, because this somewhere results in the slow rollout of plans and implementation that stakeholders have in mind. So ethanol production will need environmental clearances, will need land clearances, zonal clearances for new projects, and expansion of existing projects. The report therefore recommends that issue of consent to establish for distilleries across state governments should be expedited. Also, a single window system should be formulated by the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade to accord speedy clearances. There is so much that can be achieved by just ensuring that the manufacturing capacities get all clearances at a faster pace to achieve all the targets that have been set. Now, the other recommendation for under the Niti Aayog report is to ensure that ethanol blended petrol compatible vehicles, those are the vehicles that will need to be rolled out for undertaking the E20 blend, have E20 material compliant and E10 engine tuned vehicles to tolerate the blends and give optimal performance. In this, our recommendation is that, similar to the incentives that were given to EV manufacturers under FAME policies, why not introduce some incentives for the OEM so that the right engine and the right technology comes out and is rolled out immediately for supporting the blend? Now, ethanol blending in India, although facing some challenges at root level, we believe is ready to roll out and implement its blending targets. It has also set up a remarkable roadmap for a longer course of action to produce ethanol and progress further with the help of ethanol policies, government initiatives, interventions, off-take assurances for long-term, and availability of suitable vehicle technologies. So this is our piece on ethanol. The other popular biofuel used is biodiesel, which is derived from vegetable oil or fatty acid methyl ester. So if you see, the sudden push for biodiesel came from FSSAI's initiative for repurposing used cooking oil. Cooking oil as such is generally reused by food processors multiple times, which can, of course, lead to health concerns. And disposal of this used cooking oil in sewage systems is also a growing cause of concern, as this is a hazardous substance under the Hazardous Waste Management Rules 2016. Therefore, the government launched a new project to convert used cooking oil, or UCO, into something more useful. FSSAI recently flagged off the RUCO project, short for repurposed used cooking oil, that plans to convert vegetable oils, animal fats, or the restaurant grease that has already been used multiple times in cooking into biodiesel for running diesel vehicles, or in fact, any equipment that uses diesel. So RUCO then enables collection of inedible cooking oil by authorized agencies from institutional or individual users, which is then transferred to a plant to make biodiesel. This fuel is then proposed to be blended with vehicle fuel produced by OMCs for distribution at the petrol pumps. RUCO is no doubt a commendable move. When executed on a greater scale, it obviously not only removes inedible oil from the food chain, but it also breathes new life into it by transforming it into an eco-friendly fuel. There are, some registrations and some approvals that come in the way of implementing this FSSAI guidelines, and we'll come to that in the next portion. So we've tried to explain, what the composition of ethanol biodiesel is and what are the large level policies that are that govern these two components. Coming to the regulatory framework, like I mentioned, the National Policy on Biofuels 2018 is actually the primary piece of legislative framework. And then you have the other policies and guidelines around these that actually harness the various environmental, social, and economic benefits arising out of large-scale development of biofuels in the country and come together to complement the 2018 policy. So what are the key features that are laid out in the national policy on biofuels? The first one is feedstock availability and its development. How do we identify more sources of feedstock, and how do we quickly develop to make it so popular that there isn't increased dependency on sugar-based products? So the 2018 policy, therefore, allowed for production of ethanol from bee molasses and other alternate raw materials for production. It was also promoted for using damaged food grains like wheat, broken rice, etc., which are unfit for human consumption. The local communities were encouraged from Gram Panchayat to from talukas, etc., for plantations of non-edible oil seeds bearing trees such as karanja, neem, castor, etc., so that this can become an appropriate feedstock for generation of ethanol. The last thing, which is obviously technology, the ever-evolving technology, so requisite R&D on biofuels to attain advanced feedstock conversion and techno-commercial viability, along with setting up focused groups, from various representations like academics, industry, and relevant ministries is also focused upon. In terms of financing, government will consider declaring oil expelling, extraction, and processing units for production of biodiesel and storage and distribution alike infrastructure for biofuels as a priority sector for the purposes of lending by financial institution. Not just being recognized as a priority sector. Other than that, sourcing of multilateral financing and funding would also be encouraged for biofuel development, including carbon financing opportunities. The distribution and marketing of biofuel is also given significant emphasis. Like I said, OMCs are in the middle of all of this, and so they become responsible to maintain and improve the storage, distribution, supply infrastructure, and to meet the actual requirements of biofuels in the market to the end consumer. The 2018 policy also leaves an open door for other players to distribute and market biofuels as well. This policy also allocates responsibility to various ministries to deal with different aspects of biofuel development. It's not just, agriculture specific or petroleum and natural gas specific. So there are various aspects that are allocated at different ministry level for the development and promotion in the country. And so a National Biofuel Coordination Committee headed by the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas has been set up, and representatives of various ministries would be the members of this committee. This committee is set to meet periodically to provide overall coordination, effective end-to-end implementation, and monitoring of biofuel programs, including the blending program. The last feature that is important in terms of increasing acceptance across all stakeholders is the Bureau of Indian Standards will review and update the existing safety standards, as well as develop new standards in a time-bound manner for devices and systems for various end-use applications for which standards have not yet been prepared at par with international standards. Now, like you would have seen, 2018 policy actually contains and is a big step in terms of first step to biofuel legislative piece, right? But just not just that, there is a quick amendment that followed. So in 2022, amendment to the National Biofuel Policy was introduced, where the large level focus has been to explore other alternatives of feedstock for 1G and develop 2G and 3G technologies for production of ethanol. Some other key features in this amendment are that, like, we spoke about E20. The target has been to for ethanol OMCs to sell blended petrol with a percentage of ethanol up to 20% throughout the country from April 1, 2023. Import of feedstock for production of biodiesel would be permitted to the extent necessary, which will be decided by the National Biofuel Coordination Committee. The export of biofuels also will be permitted only under certain special circumstances, subject to the approval of NBCC. When there is a surplus of biofuels in the country and the domestic requirement has been met, export may be allowed. The price of biofuels which have been made from domestic feedstock for the domestic market becomes high due to the increase in feedstock prices. Export may be allowed, and in case of exigencies or calamities such as medical requirements or COVID for that matter, export may be allowed. Now, with export and import, I think we should also talk about the foreign trade policy, which becomes another important regulation to quickly speak on when it comes to biofuels, because this is the instrument governing import and export in India. DGFT has issued a notification regarding the amendment in the export policy of biofuels. Under this, import, like I mentioned, of biofuels is restricted. Export is also restricted with the condition of procurement of a license from DGFT for non-fuel purposes only, and other exceptions like we just discussed about in the 2022 policy. Specifically for biodiesel, there is a guidelines for sale of biodiesel 2019, which outline the regulations and procedures related to the sale and use of biodiesel as a blend with high-speed diesel for transportation purposes in India. This provides for, amongst other things, a suitable registration system for the manufacturers, suppliers, and sellers. So there's a repository that is maintained. The guidelines also provide for application procedure for retail outlets intending to sell indigenously made biodiesel. They also require the owner or the operator of the outlet to display the percentage of biodiesel allowed to be blended with diesel in the customer's vehicle, and a clear warning displayed at the outlet that the usage with a certain percentage exceeding the prescribed percentage can cause damage to the engine. So sufficient transparent mechanism or reporting regulations have been implemented under the guidelines for biodiesel, for sale of biodiesel. These guidelines will also help in curbing the illegal trade of biodiesel and would assist the relevant authorities in regulating the production, distribution, and sale of B100 throughout the country. Other than the large level pieces of policies and regulatory framework that we have noticed, there are some other licenses that are required, which are common across industries. For example, the BIS certification is, of course, important from a compliance to Indian standards, so that various considerations like public interest, safety of environment, prevention of unfair trade practices, national security are taken care of. For biofuels, alternate fuels, and drop-in fuels, the need is to conform with relevant standards, which is IS 15464/2004 and IS 15607/2016. The distilleries for ethanol and sugar mills are required to obtain a PESO license under the Petroleum and Explosive Safety Organization of India. There are other very common licenses that any manufacturing or production unit requires, such as the factory license, import and export license, given the relevance, boiler registration, fire NOC, all of that. Now, as a biodiesel manufacturer who uses used cooking oil as feedstock to manufacture biodiesel, you'll need to be registered with the relevant state or the union territories as per the 2019 guidelines discussed earlier. And this is notified at the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas stage, and they will also need to enroll themselves with FSSAI for collecting used cooking oil from food business operators. The aggregators, like specifically, there are also collectors and aggregators of used cooking oil who will need to be recognized as non-food production unit, NFP unit, under FSSAI. A list of documents will need to be submitted on the portal. please reach out to us, separately to understand the detailed process involved here, and we'll be happy to chat on that. Other than these statutory licenses, in terms of just setting up, the unit, there are other land clearances, zonal clearances, environment clearance under the environment impact assessment, which may be needed depending on the location. Those will be relevant as well. Also, quickly looking at some of the incentives available under the National Biofuel Policy of 2018. Like I mentioned, lending by financial institution for the purpose of biodiesel extraction and production, including storage and distribution infrastructure, is considered as priority lending. So that is prioritized. Foreign investment up to 100% in biofuel technology is permitted, provided that the biofuel is produced domestically. There are other fiscal incentives such as viability gap funding, subsidies, tax incentives, grants, which are considered under the 2018 policy. National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development and other public sector banks also encourage to provide financial assistance in this sector. The last economic and the fiscal advantage that we have identified is also the opportunity to generate carbon credit for saving carbon dioxide emissions on account of your biofuel feedstock generation. So this should be explored by manufacturers as well. I now will let Nikunj take us through some of the state level incentives that are available.
Thank you, Janvi. As stated by her, India has been overachieving its ethanol targets, and state incentives have played a major role here. However, one thing that I would like to highlight before actually moving on to the state schemes is the much talked about long-term ethanol procurement policy. Before 2019, the suppliers of ethanol and OMCs did not have any long-term arrangement, but was done mainly through tenders based on annual demand, and then allocation was based on distance of distillery to OMC location, giving 5% of purchase amount as bank guarantee, and other conditions as laid down under the agreement. In 2019, the policy envisaged a 5-year allocation period wherein the supply was made through the same quoting mechanism, but a refined allocation system was done, which also included a change in fuel rates and also uniform pricing for different types of feedstocks. Our understanding here is that the implication of this scheme would go beyond the EBP program, as the suppliers would be provided with long-term assurances to manage their supply of ethanol and reduction in the number of tenders. But the government here should ensure that a fair price is given to all the feedstock producers. For 1G ethanol, the government introduced interest subvention schemes. But an important point to be noted here is that it will not be available to those who are availing any other scheme. This scheme would provide interest to the eligible suppliers at 6% per annum, or else 50% of the rate of interest charged by the lending institutions shall be borne by the central government for 5 years. Since the government also wants to focus on 2G ethanol, for the reasons we have already highlighted in our webinar, PMG1 was approved in 2019, which is basically a viability gap funding scheme wherein maximum 20% of project costs will be provided. Now let's deep dive into the state policies, as they play a pivotal role in accelerating the biofuel production and achieving the specified targets. After analyzing all the state policies, we have picked up the states wherein appreciative efforts have been made till date. One thing we have noticed across states like Assam, Jharkhand, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu is that the incentives are provided for 100% fuel grade ethanol production or distribution distilleries for 5 years. The standard incentives that we see in all these states are power subsidy, fixed capital investment, working capital loan subsidy. For example, Assam gives 5% up to 50 lakhs per annum, whereas in Jharkhand, it is 6% of the total loan. There are also 100% exemption in stamp duty and registration charges in Jharkhand, Bihar, MP, and there is also 100% ESI and EPF exemption in Assam and Bihar. Also, There are some specific incentives which are provided by states in order to gain attraction from the stakeholders, namely procedural incentives like exemption from excise license and permission to import feedstocks from other states or countries subject to government permission in Tamil Nadu, and 100% reimbursement of patent charges up to 5 lakhs in MP. Now, moving on to biodiesel, similar policies have been introduced either specifically as a biodiesel policy or a general renewable policy. While some states like UP only provide fiscal incentives, mainly production based incentives up to 20 crores, there are states like Chhattisgarh, which provide both fiscal as well as non fiscal incentives, namely permission to purchase agricultural land for industrial purposes, increase in renewal period for obtaining CTO, or even single issuance of CTO for all the activities. This is done to ease out the regulatory hurdles and promote ease of doing business. Also, there are some states like Rajasthan and Orissa who are offering fallow land at a nominal price and giving priority to renewable energy projects. Not to forget Maharashtra here, which does not have a specific biofuel policy but provides incentives through the MSME policy of up to 50 crores and has even made biofuel a thrust or focus sector. In conclusion, most of these policies would supplement the national policy very efficiently and make the process of claiming incentives easier, smoother, and less time consuming. Having spoken about the national and state incentives in detail, it's also time to analyze other countries wherein biofuels are predominantly produced. First, we look at the United States, wherein 40% of global production is being done. If we look back at the emergence of biofuels, the first significant event that would come to my mind is the 1970s oil crisis, wherein petrol became expensive, which prompted the first shift towards energy saving technologies, including biofuels using corn as a feedstock. However, the trend slowed down and not much advancement was done at that stage. Similar to India, US is also policy driven with regulations in place. The ethanol blending there began with the introduction of the Renewable Fuel Standard in 2005. Quite similar to the EBP program, which we have discussed in detail. And this took into account 4 types of renewable fuels, namely the one produced from cornstarch, biomass other than cornstarch, 2G ethanol, and biomass-based diesel. Also, tradable credits were generated for that particular year and for the next year, which is very similar to what India is looking to explore in future. Tax grants are also provided for pure unblended diesel, and infrastructure grants to petrol pumps, fueling stations, and fleet facilities are also extended till 2032. As next steps, the country will provide tax credits from 2025 for SAF as well. Moving on to Brazil. Similar to US, efforts in 1970s were begun. But here the only difference is that Brazil actually launched their national ethanol program in 1975 and provided subsidies, soft agricultural and industrial loans, guaranteed purchase of their product, incentives, tax breaks, etc., and mandated petrol to be blended with 20% ethanol. However, after a great run in the 80s, ethanol production began to decline, which strongly affected the consumer confidence here. To keep the cars on road, Brazil was forced to reduce the blend, first from 22 to 18% and then to 13% to save the ethanol for pure ethanol vehicles, and the trend continued to slow down due to governmental interference. Subsequently, the government realized and there were preferential tax treatment for flex fuel vehicles, tax incentives for biodiesel depending on raw materials, separate climate fund, and credit lines were also introduced so as to maintain this biofuel production. As a result, the blending progressed to a current 27%, and flex fuel vehicles comprise nearly 90% of Brazil's light-duty vehicle fleet. As next steps, E30 is the target there, and they are also looking to prioritize research on SAF, 2G ethanol, and other low-carbon fuels. The last region which we look at is the European Union. The European Union began implementing renewable energy targets in 2003, which had then set a target of 2% by 2005, which subsequently got increased as the years went by through Renewable Energy Directive 1, 2, and 3. And this was recently amended to a binding target of 42.5% by 2030 and 45% of a non-binding target. One thing to be noted here is that the targets are for all types of renewable energy and not just biofuels. Until now, we have gotten an idea around the various policies and incentives laid down by the Indian government and other countries like US, EU, and Brazil. And I'm sure some of you might be interested in starting a business around this. Therefore, I would like Janvi to highlight the key documents you have seen participants execute in this sector.
Thank you, Nikunj. Just quickly before we move on to that next segment, we have a question which I would like to quickly address. The question is, how does the policy cover biofuel feedstocks? Because the policy specify biofuels and not feedstocks. So yes, that's right. The policy specifies the various categories of biofuels along with detailed explanation and ingredients of what kind of feedstocks form part of each of the categories. In fact, also in the 2022 amendment, further emphasis on feedstock was given as a description, and it was mentioned for ethanol and biodiesel production. I hope that answer is sufficient. If there are any other, leading questions or subsequent questions, please feel to drop them in the chat box, and we'll take it up in the next segment. Continuing with the documentation, like Nikunj mentioned, typically we've seen a few common agreements regulating the risks and interest of various stakeholders in the biofuels market. Some of these, depending on the stage in the value chain, are like if a manufacturer, at a manufacturer level, they enter into long-term offtake agreements for securing the sale of future resources that the project is going to generate. This also firmly establishes that a market for the project actually exists. It is also particularly important from a bankability perspective because the project finance leaders are, they're interested that the project has a pre-arranged purchaser of a substantial portion of the production, right, the future production. So that gives them a high level of comfort. Now, from the lender perspective, an important clause that we have seen them try to push down in the offtake agreement between the manufacturer and the customer is in the event of default clause stating that the credit worthiness of the offtaker, if it falls below a certain target, then it could lead to termination. It obviously impacts the purchasing power of the client, and this will then have impact on the project itself and hence the lender. The OMCs will routinely execute fuel supply agreement on a take or pay basis, which obligates the buyer to take delivery of a predetermined quantity of fuel or pay the monetary equivalent of the predetermined quantity of fuel in case of failure to take delivery. And this is popularly known as the take or pay clauses. Other than these, for large-scale projects, you have your common documents, which are the financing agreements, escrow arrangement, etc. We've also identified some, issues or gaps with what the current framework on biofuels has. And Nikunj, I apologize to start with this bit, which is lack of incentives at the central and state level, because you listed a whole, great deal of incentives available. But these are heavily focused on 1G technology. It's time to maybe introduce benefits and incentives for the 2G technology development as well. So in that, Pradhan Mantri G1 Yojana should be expanded to include more biofuel projects, and the government should think about raising the budget allocated for it. Also, given that the industry is still at a nascent stage, the government should think about extending the duration of the scheme beyond 23-24. One other suggestion that we've seen work wonderful for all of your established renewable industry is introducing a PLI scheme for increasing manufacturing capacity. The second gap is actually to address the issue of lack of availability and hence the rising cost of feedstocks. India has huge potential actually for using various types of domestically produced feedstock, most of which we've listed down in the previous slides, due to its immense diversity. If you look at the emerging markets, which is Indonesia, Malaysia, and also the current world leaders in biodiesel production, Brazil, USA, and Europe, which Nikunj mentioned, it's because these nations have been able to use locally accessible feedstock in a very competitive and efficient manner, which allows them to scale up production as needed. So India could then spend money on domestically producing these kinds of feedstock like UCO, animal tallow, non-edible sources like karanja, jatropha, and other plants producing oilseeds. While it will also obviously have an impact on the feedstock cost, domestic feedstock can lower expenses and ultimately have a favorable effect on biodiesel prices as well. The next is, while I mentioned that the biofuel policy has so many attractive categorization of biofuels, one thing that is a notable miss is the mention of sustainable aviation fuel. We've seen recent news about MOUs between airlines and the industry participants getting signed for using and blending biofuel into the aviation fuel, but this was missed into the categorization or definition of biofuels under the policy. So if this is included, it extends the incentives and risk diversification to SAF manufacturers available under the policy. We also feel like an SAF board must be established in various states to ensure that the state governments also come together to support for the infrastructure that is required, the fiscal incentives that are needed, as mentioned under the policy, for development of SAF at this stage. In fact, Harshdeep Singh Puri, the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, said that the Indian government will introduce guidelines which would require domestic airlines to utilize a 1% blend of SAF by 2025 and 5% by 2030. So we believe that quick actions will need to be taken to make this come to reality. From a sustainability perspective of ethanol, and this goes back to how there is heavy reliance on sugar-based sources for ethanol production, sugarcane cultivation requires a lot of water, and this is highly also dependent on periodic rainfall patterns. So this causes significant stress on water sources, and drought-like circumstances have been brought about by the production of sugarcane in some districts, which hurts all types of livelihoods. So then it becomes important to discover, cultivate, promote other kinds of technologies, other forms of feedstock, and make sure that those are developed enough so that the market is able to depend on these feedstock forms as well. The ethanol blending marketing infrastructure, which is controlled by OMCs, will also need to develop very quickly in the coming years, because the additional capacity of ethanol blended fuel is completely dependent on how these OMCs are able to deliver in the years to come. It will need additional storage tanks, marketing terminals, depots, ethanol compliant dispensing units, additional underground tank pipes, etc. So a lot of work around how the infrastructure is developed for the marketing, distribution, storage, supply, all of this will need to get quickly developed. In terms of flex fuel vehicles, very promising, very interesting, but the prototypes of high fuels that have been rolled out will need, and the commercial viability of these prototypes still remains a question mark. Not much has been done by the OEMs, OMCs, and ministries in terms of a collective effort in how this will pan out to even reach the E20 target for that matter. So we believe that quick efforts will need to be taken in that sense. So this is, what we believe are some of the gaps that need to be quickly addressed. Praveen, do you have some other concluding remarks?
Yeah, thanks. I think there's one other question which we'll also address, but thanks, Janvi and Nikunj. I think that Janvi and Nikunj have kind of largely summarized what the regulatory framework is and where we stand today as an industry when it comes to kind of use of biofuel as an energy source. Before my summary is just going to be largely taking 2 or 3 points from what they have covered mostly. But before I go on to that, I think there is this one quote that one of my colleagues happened to share with me. Thank you, Devansh, for that, which was, a quote by Rudolf Diesel, who's the inventor of the diesel engine. And this is premised on one of the first successful experiments which happened in late 1800s, when a diesel engine was run using peanut oil, and which laid the foundation of the idea of replacing fossil fuels with alternate fuels such as biofuels. It's been a century after that, but he quoted specifically, the use of vegetable oils for engine fuels may seem insignificant today, but such oils may become in the course of time as important as petroleum and the coal tar products of the present time. Well, it's a century after that. He'd be very disappointed to see that we still are dependent very much when it comes to the transportation sector on fossil fuels, on petrol and diesel largely. But as we've seen in the electrification of vehicles, right? It's also the right policy initiatives. It's the right kind of investment and funding opportunities which come along, which enable all mavericks like the Elon Musks who come along and kind of change industries. So therefore, I believe that in the whole scheme of things, this is not going to be the only factor which is going to be the change to the transportation industry. We look at various other energy sources in the transportation sector. We do a lot of work in the electric mobility space, and we can see that as a sector which is booming. We believe that there will be fuel cell technology or hydrogen fuel cell technology which will complement all of this, but it's going to be a mix of all of this which is going to enable the transportation sector in moving into a more cleaner and environment friendly sector. If you look at the policy itself, it's very distinctive and futuristic, places a strong emphasis on the 2G feedstocks. But however, when it comes to the administration and the implementation itself, we believe that there's probably been some deviation. The concentration is on feedstock based on food grains rather than 2G. While there is a potential in the biofuels industry, we believe that there are hurdles to be crossed. We believe that the growth of the industry is dependent on a few important aspects. One is, of course, the requirement to promote research and development in the field of advanced biofuels and diversification of biofuels. This is obviously going to be dependent on the kind of government incentives, the government initiatives which are going to be there, and how well they are able to ensure that there is adequate private participation. And therefore, the second point, which comes to, to ensuring that there is and to encourage more private participation, especially from the private sector OMCs and the OEMs, who are going to be the crucial players in the market to change the industry and bring about biofuels as an alternative source in the transportation sector. Lastly, of course, we believe that the requirement to integrate 1G ethanol and CBG plants, or with established and proven 2G and 3G technologies, cogeneration of ethanol with other bioenergies. All of this will ensure that it brings about some amount of economic viability, sustainability, and optimization of common resources and reduce capital expenditure. So we believe that while we are at the cusp of the biofuel revolution. I think that there is a fair bit to be done. And let's see how it kind of plays out, because what we've seen, if you were to ask us, we see that the kind of impetus and the kind of push that is there on electric mobility or hydrogen is far, far more than what it is probably for biofuels. But we're hoping that it will happen over time, and the right kind of incentives will ensure that there are enough market players and private participants in this sector. That's it from us. I think there was one last question, Janvi. Nikunj, I don't know, do you want to take that?
Yes, thanks, Praveen. The question is, do export restrictions need for licenses apply to feedstocks like UCO or tallow, or just to biofuels produced from them? The export restrictions are applicable not on feedstocks. It's only on the biofuels as per the requirements. Import, however, will need to be determined on a case-to-case basis by the National Biofuel Coordination Committee.
Right. And there are a couple of, I mean, yeah, if there are any other questions, please feel free to kind of keep posting. But we happen to kind of also get these questions from, policy think tanks and people who we interact with in the industry usually. One of them is that what is the need for a global biofuel alliance? What is the advantage? Is it going to be another OPEC, which is going to be in, control pricing and production and supply chain and create anomalies in pricing, etc.? We believe that, we could take the example of the International Solar Alliance as well. May not be as big as the OPEC, of course, but it does bring about benefits. There are fears around it, of course, but I think that in the current scheme of where biofuel stands in the overall energy source space, I think it's important that we do have an alliance where there is exchange of technology and technical know-how in order to ensure that all countries are cooperating with each other to kind of ensure that there is, a joint initiation and a joint effort by all of the countries and geographies to make biofuel an important energy source when it comes to in the transportation sector. Another question that we come across is whether players can claim incentives from center as well as state. If not, what are the kind of mechanisms? It is true that a lot of the incentives that Janvi and Nikunj, more so Nikunj, mentioned, there may be some overlaps which are there. If we look at the language of the schemes, it will either expressly provide for the participant availing any other scheme to be ineligible in most cases, or for the incentives to be read together. So yes, there is a little bit of a confusion over there, but we believe that one of the, I think in one of the gaps that we mentioned, or one of the issues that we had mentioned, is that the present regulatory framework does have such issues, and the governmental authorities, both on the center and the state level, require a higher level of coordination to ensure that such conflicts do not arise and stakeholders can avail the necessary incentives without any difficulty. So these are two things that we kind of come across. I mean, questions that we thought that it may be a good idea to kind of just bring to your notice as well. Any other questions? I see there are no other questions right now, but please feel free to kind of write to us. Like I mentioned, we do a fair bit of work in the alternative energy industry that's across biofuels, and it's across the spectrum, right from solar and wind to biofuels to hydrogen to everything that's new and alternative, and which is going to play a large part in in a cleaner and greener environment. Thank you everyone for joining us, and please reach out to us if you have any questions or further clarifications.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.